Hi everyone. In conjunction with International Women's Day, we're running a month-long campaign to celebrate prominent female middle templates in Malaysia. Every week throughout the month, we'll be releasing an episode of Fireside Chat where our featured middle templar will share their success story, gender-specific challenges faced along the way, as well as word of advice to aspiring and young legal professionals to break the bias. My name is Christine Lay, a practicing lawyer from Tree & Company, Cheng and Arif, and I'm very excited to introduce to you our guest today, a prominent human rights lawyer. Don't be fooled by her friendly face and cheerful demeanor. Honey Tan is a woman of steel. Her primary practice is in the area of family law, and she also actively engages in public interest litigation, particularly in the areas of equality and non-discrimination. She is a former executive director of the All Women Action Society, AWAM, and an active committee member of the Malaysian Bar. Honey, thank you so much for giving us a bit of your time today.
Hi, now, thank you.
Hello, thank you for joining us today. Now, Honey, I'm aware that throughout the years, you have been very active in the scene of advocating for gender equality and diversity, and have always been fearlessly vocal in women empowerment initiatives. Based on my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Honey, amongst your long list of contributions, you're currently involved in organizations such as Women's Fund Asia, and also involved in initiatives such as the Universal Periodic Review, driven by the Human Rights Council. Honey, please do share some highlights of the work that you're currently involved in your continuous efforts of furthering and enhancing gender equality and women empowerment.
I think for now, one of the really exciting things that I'm doing is the service that I'm doing on the board of Women's Fund Asia. They're a feminist donor organization, which basically means that we fund other organizations in Asia for the human rights work that they do. And it's basically more specific than human rights. It's actually women's human rights. So WFA basically mobilizes funds for women's organizations. Apart from that, the other kind of work that I do is at the United Nations level. So I've been involved in the Universal Periodic Review, the UPR, since its inception and when Malaysia was first reviewed. It's quite an interesting process because it's every 4.5, 5 years, the Human Rights Council will review the status of human rights of each member state of the United Nations. And that's quite an interesting one because it's a very diplomatic process, and whether you put in a report or not, you will be reviewed. I want to say this in contrast to the CEDAW committee. The CEDAW is basically the Women's Bill of Rights, and that's a convention which is also started by the United Nations. Now, the CEDAW review process is an expert process. So if a member state, a state that has actually signed up to CEDAW does not send in the report, they don't get reviewed.
All right, thank you so much, Honey, for sharing that with us. It's definitely interesting to hear what are the efforts that's being put in on an institutional level on how they review our human rights scale, so to speak, in different member states, including Malaysia, of course. Now, on that thread, Honey, I would like to ask, why do you think it is important for us to continuously shine a light on women empowerment and gender equality and diversity related matters, when some may argue that women are indeed more empowered now, and diversity at workplace, for example, has significantly improved over the years?
Well, clearly it's because it's a wrong perception. I mean, if you just look at our own profession, you look at all the big firms, okay? So they have, if you look at the partnership list, you may or may not see a lot of women partners. But the key things that you need to look at, who's the managing partner, which partner actually has more equity in the firm. And almost inevitably, you will see that they are men. And if you were to look at, say, for example, judges, right? So if you look at judges, you'll see that maybe at the lower like magistrates court level, you have more female women magistrates. But as you go up and up, at the federal court level, we definitely have an overwhelming number of men. But of course, everybody's going to say, oh, our CJ is a female. But you know, how long did it take after independence for us to finally have a female CJ, you know? And also, if you just look at overall composition of the federal court, the members of the judges there are mostly male.
On that note, Honey, if I could then now bring you back slightly to your earlier years of practice. You've shared just now about different law firms having different, how the management looks like, whether that's male dominated or female dominated. Now, if you could perhaps share some of the general gender specific challenges that you face back as a female litigators. Have you personally experienced any of such challenges?
For me, I did face some, but I suppose not as serious as others because of the area that I practice. So, and this is also another gender aspect, okay? So in family law practice, you will find that there are more female lawyers than male lawyers because again, people perceive, you know, family practice as something that, you know, women can do because it needs a soft touch and all of that. Whereas if you look at criminal law litigation, so it's mostly male. And it also intersects with another identity of us, you know, which is race. So you will see quite often that the criminal litigator will be male and Indian. Conveyancing lawyers, you will find very often female and Chinese, you know, and family law practitioners, we kind of have a mixed bag, but they tend not to be female Malays. So it's all of that. So the discriminating factor sometimes, or the stereotype factors, is not just on gender, it's also quite often on race. So it's a mixed bag like that.
So, Honey, you've shared with us that there are different kind of stereotypes in different, even within the areas of practice, like family law and criminal law, there are different type of stereotypes. How do you suppose one breaks such stereotype, especially from a gender-specific point of view? How do we overcome and break such bias in the different area of law?
Actually, I would say the huge part of the responsibility actually is not ours, it's actually the government's. Because the government has actually, you know, acceded to CEDAW, which is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. They signed up to it in 1995. And one of the key articles, Article 5A, talks about the job, it's the work, it's the legal obligation of our government to actually break all these gender stereotypes so that, you know, you don't associate one particular thing with one particular gender. But I have to say that our government has been very, very slow in you know, moving forward. So it took them so long before they find. I mean, we were in the 2000s already before they actually amended the federal constitution to make gender one of the grounds, you know, on which you cannot discriminate. You know, from 1957 until, you know, 2000, whatever it was that we changed it. So it took a long time. So one of the other things is, it's not just the law, you know, I always say that laws are only good in changing things, maybe like 30%. 70% of the work is actually on changing our own perceptions, how we view things, our stereotypes, you know, that is actually the harder work. And the reason why I say that's the government's work mostly is because they are the ones in control of education, which is one of the key areas. If you really want to start breaking down the gender stereotype, you have to start young. And if I don't know whether you remember your you know, your school books, your textbooks, it is incredibly like rife with gender stereotypes. You know, they always portray the nurse as the female, the doctor as the male, and mommy is always at home cooking, and daddy is always driving the car coming home. You know, so that's not good, lah. So, and because it is education that we as individuals can only do it at the personal level. Like you have to talk to your own children, your parents, your siblings, your friends. But if you want a systemic change, that has to come from the government. And they're actually quite poor at doing it. I mean, just listen, do you remember very recently, maybe a few days ago, how the deputy minister of the deputy women's minister was saying that, men can chastise their wives, softly, or what on earth does that mean,
That is true. In fact, I do agree with you, Honey, that change needs to happen. Of course, individually, we do play a role as well, but more significant, substantial change does come from institutional level. And perhaps such stereotype can only be overcome on an institutional level. But on that note, Honey, you have also mentioned that on a personal level, we all need to play a part as well. And perhaps you could share with us what is your advice to young and aspiring practitioners of all gender, in fact, who are seeking to contribute to the efforts of breaking the bias? What are we able to do from an individual capacity?
Okay, I think I just want to emphasize that the change that comes must mostly come from the government. So it's not just all the institutional stuff, it's also the personal stuff. So it's a combination of two. It's just that the bigger burden is borne by the state, our government, now I forgot what you asked me already. Can you please repeat that?
Yeah, this is, the question would be, what can we do from an individual
okay.
capacity
Now I remember.
to contribute to the effort?
Yeah. So I think as lawyers, the first thing I would say is, of course, join our bar committee, our committees. So our committees are at two levels. So at the bar council level, which is the national level, join the committees like, human rights. We have a women's rights committee because a few years ago, I was pushing really hard for the establishment of the women's rights committee. And finally, after, because the bar council Malaysian bar has been around longer than our Malaysia, and after all these years, it was only, I think, in like 3-4 years ago, maybe 2 years or 3 years ago, that we actually have a women's rights committee. So it took a long time. So join those committees, join the human rights committee, the women's rights committee, and do some work there. Of course, at the state level, your state bars will also have other committees. Like I know the KL one has, is it women and gender rights or something? You have a committee, something about a gender committee.
Women and gender equality.
So do that, join that. I mean, clearly you can, that's the more institutional level engagement. But like I said, the other one, the more personal one, is actually reading, reflecting. I think a lot of it is thinking about, why are things like this? When it's like this, who does it benefit? Why can't we change this? Because a lot of times people always say, oh, that's the way the culture is. That's our tradition, But that actually is not true, because in the same way that human rights evolve, cultures and tradition also change, So otherwise, hey, Christine, you and me, I suspect we'll be the ugliest women around. You know why? Because our feet are not that 1 inch or 2 inches. Remember those lotus feet? Right?
Yes, the cultural,
was considered a great beauty. Correct? But okay, I'm a size English 6, so I'll be like super ugly, okay? But that's it. You see, the thing is that it changed, it evolved over the years, that, they no longer consider that false deformity a thing of beauty, So in the same way that people always say, oh, these are culture, tradition, but cultures and tradition are not static. Our rights are not static. The federal constitution is not static.
Right. So on that note, Honey, you've mentioned earlier that as culture progresses, as time passes, the gender equality or women empowerment scene changes as well. So on that note, if I could just get you to look back on your earlier years, and in comparison to the current situation at the bar now, from your observation, from your personal experience, do you think that women empowerment has indeed progressed positively at the bar?
Well, it depends on how you measure it. Okay, so if you are looking at the composition of the Bar Council, that's the governing body of the bar. So I'm currently serving as one of the council members, and I would say like right now we have maybe 26% women council members, which is one of the highest we've ever had. Okay, so if you just go to the Bar Council building now, and they have all those photos up, from like long time ago, and if you just have a look, and you will see that progressively there have been like more and more women, but still it's not enough. Women lawyers form the majority of the bar. I don't know whether people know that, but if you look at the governing body, the council members, we're only like 26%. So we're like maybe 30% less or whatever it is, So what are we doing to actually make it easier for women to actually, participate at the bar? So I would say one of the really good things that a great leveler is doing things by Zoom like this, because previously when you had to like travel, especially if you're from out of the Klang Valley, right, was very difficult to get members to come and volunteer and do things. But now because most of it is by Zoom, we actually have much better participation, from out of town. I mean, I shouldn't say out of town, but non-Klang Valley lawyers, So sometimes technology is a boon, it helps us. But when it comes to discriminating against women, so sometimes the internet also makes life really, really bad, So like maybe all the traditional forms of discrimination against women, like violence and all that. So it has morphed, it's changed from the more physical type to now coming onto the internet, all the stalking, the bullying, and the really, really awful thing about the internet is that it doesn't forget. You may think you've deleted it, you may think you ask, Facebook or whoever it is to take it down, but it will always remain on the internet. I mean, I'm sure there's also this movement on the right to be forgotten, people are also trying to say, in what way can we totally wipe out, but you can't, and the other thing also about how it discriminates, this whole internet thing discriminates against women is that even if you were to get an order against somebody not to do something on the internet, that person is just going to set up another ABC account and then just do the same thing, and you can't always go back to court for each and everything that happens again and again, under different names, because in a way our law is quite clunky in the sense that orders are made specifically against one person. So if you are going to say ABC is now harassing me, okay, so you get a court order against ABC, so ABC stops. Then he goes and starts as XYZ. You have to start all over again. Who has the money and energy?
You've mentioned that, like you said, with the change of circumstances that we're in now, with the pandemic and with how technology and internet has taken over how things are conducted now, it presents a new set of challenges that is now before our initiative of further enhancing women's rights. How do you stay motivated? Do share with us, how do you stay motivated and continue this initiative, continue putting effort into this continuous effort of furthering women's rights? Do share with us, Honey. Because I myself, as a young lawyer, I would want to, seek inspiration from you as well, because you do empower a lot of young female lawyers.
Well, I think ultimately is your interest. If you're interested in something, you want to do it. So like I'm interested in women's rights. I mean, primarily it's very selfish because I'm also a woman, but apart from that, it's also about using the law, because I mean, I love the law. I love the law in its many, many forms, whether you're litigating it, whether you're working on policy, are you working on, legislation, and awareness raising overall, about the law. I suppose you find something that you love, and it's a lot of time. It takes out a lot of your time and effort, but still, if it's something you don't begrudge it, you just want to do it. And because I find that the law, in some ways, it's very rigid, but in other ways, it's very, very malleable. You can massage it, you can stretch it, you can, cut it up, put it back together. So I think if you look at the law in an interesting way, there's so many things you can do with it. I think quite often, especially, I hate to say this, our Malaysian education system does not teach you to question. That is a killer. It's a killer for anybody who's working on rights. It's a killer for anybody who's working on, advocacy work, because the key thing for all of us is always to question why, how, and then, so these are the questions that it's always, when I'm presented with a situation, I'm always saying, why is it like that? Huh? Why has it been like that all the time? Oh my God. So then you try to think, in what way can I argue this? So if you do public interest litigation, I would say maybe 99% of the time you will lose, because you're just trying to argue something out there, or, maybe there's no law yet. You're trying to persuade the judges, because we are a common law country, so judges can make certain kinds of, laws where there's a lacuna and all that. And that was how we now have law on sexual harassment as a tort, right? Because of the Mohammad Rizwan's case at the federal court. So it's those little tantalizing things that say, hey, you know what? If you argue in a more interesting way, you can change something.
Thank you so much, Honey, for all the advice that you have given us. Essentially, from what I understand, is that we need to stay, first of all, of course, the interest needs to be there. Like you said, perhaps to a certain extent, it's a selfish interest as well, because I myself, we would like to protect and further enhance women's rights. And you have also shared with us on how we can contribute on a personal capacity as a young lawyer to be involved in the Malaysian Bar Council, to be more active, and perhaps if you are able to contribute further on an institutional level like yourself, to be involved in Women Funds Asia and other organizations beyond just in the Malaysia platform. And it's truly inspiring to hear that after decades of work, you are still motivated to contribute to this cause, and you are still out there and truly inspiring and empowering younger female lawyers. And hopefully, in the near future, more of us will, join forces with you and further.
It's not just me, it's others like Abang Iwawan and all that. So they're all doing stuff, right? So because the work is not done, is not finished, and it will never be finished, So just hop on it and do it. And it's always the small things. You can write a letter to the editor, but then nowadays, who is a newspaper, Paul? Okay. The other thing that people generally do, which I love, TikTok. Just go and do a little TikTok video, or okay lah, maybe not TikTok also lah. Just do a short video and upload it to your Twitter account, Instagram, or Facebook lah. Whoever's still on Facebook, you can still do it, So all these things are, I think the social media that we have now is really great and can be used to change, So don't always think that, oh, I must go and do these big things. No, actually, really, honestly, it's always the small things.
I honestly do agree with you, Honey, 100%, whereby change really do, as cliche as it sounds, change really do come from yourself. And as more people contribute on an individual capacity, that's where we all can join forces and push this cause further. And just hopefully beyond International Women's Day in the month of March, it's truly a continuing effort. And as you have mentioned earlier, more work needs to be done. So on that note, thank you so much, Honey, for that incredibly insightful talk. I only hope that we could have more time. In fact, we could continue this offline as well. But once again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And on that note, to all our viewers, do check out our TMMTA, our LinkedIn and Facebook page for all our past episodes, where we have featured a federal court judge, Datuk Nalini, international arbitrator, Ms. Tan Lay Ean, general counsel, Puan Farah. All these are our past episodes, and we will be releasing one last episode next week featuring Larissa, a human rights activist. Lastly, we would also like to take this opportunity to thank L2 Icon for coming on board as our platform partner. And with that, I'll leave you. Thank you. See you. Thank you again, Honey.